Now, I'm delighted to say we are joined by the former Irish international and Ulster rugby player Stephen Ferris, who's on board this year as one of the ambassadors for the Goal Mile, which is proudly supported by AIB. This Christmas, AIB is encouraging communities across the island of Ireland to step up together and re-establish the tradition of taking part in the Goal Mile. People and communities across Ireland can step up together to take part by visiting goalmile.org. Stephen, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. Very well, thanks. It's been a while since I've been on, lads. So I know there's a few hot talking points that you might want to drag out of me from the last couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to the next 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, me too. Before we get to that, right, the Goal Mile was one of those traditions that we would have done as a family kind of over the last 5 or 6 years. But with COVID, it disappeared. So this is a real opportunity for everybody to just remember that it's a good idea to not just lie on the couch for 48 hours on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Stephen's Day. Get out and get some fresh air into your lungs.
Yeah, absolutely. Get out and meet up with a few friends, around the Christmas period. This is the 40th anniversary of it. It's been going a long time. Obviously, Goal, the charity, does such good work around numerous countries. And, if you can just get up and be a part of it and sign up, as you said, Ger, all the information's on the website. I'm going to be getting out there. I was down in Dublin there a number of weeks ago, meeting up with the rest of the ambassadors. And I didn't actually realise how much of how much people get involved in this. I'm sort of a little bit, out of the loop here in Belfast, and it's really, really big down south, and I can't wait to be a part of it this year.
Yeah, fingers crossed everybody supports it, because as you said, it's for an absolutely great cause. So let's talk rugby, right? The first part we should start with is that we have a back rower who is the best player in the world over the last 12 months. It's a remarkable achievement for Josh van der Flier, because frequently it's the 9s and 10s, it's the try scorers, or it's like the very flashy players. But sometimes, as you know, back rowers don't get all the credit they deserve. Josh van der Flier finally getting the credit.
Yeah, definitely, especially when they make the most tackles, they make the most carries, they make the most turnovers. They probably train more than anybody. So, what an achievement from him. I think he's been so durable as well this year. Just seems to be playing on the edge all the time, but it's just, turns it out week in and week out. And I think one of the main reasons why his name is now on that of being the World Player of the Year is because he's been the most consistent player for me. He's been extraordinary for Ireland. Anytime he's playing for Leinster, he's been, man of the match or nearly thereabouts. And all credit to him. I met Josh. I've met him a handful of times, obviously, but met him 5 or 6 years ago. Quite a nice, quiet fella. He hasn't talked about himself, but when he accepted this award, he just talked about everybody else that's helped him get there. And I think, he'd be very, very proud, and his family as well be very, very proud. But what a player. I wish I had the opportunity to play alongside somebody like Josh van der Flier, because he would have made a few of my tackles for me, Ger.
That back row at the moment is very difficult to get into. And Nick Timoney is right there. It was interesting that they want to see what he's like. I'd love to see what a back row, horses for courses selection might do, where you have Timoney and van der Flier. The way Australia occasionally would do that with the 2 sevens and just be like, well, we're just going to absolutely smother the opposition today. Now, this is nothing against any of the other back rowers who are in the team or in the squad, but wouldn't it be good for us just to experiment a little bit to see, okay, there might be an occasion where we decide that our game is going to be with that. Am I completely mad here?
Oh, no, not at all. I think Nick Timoney and Josh van der Flier are both better ball carriers than Michael Hooper and, say, Papali'i for New Zealand. I think they're much stronger ball carriers. Maybe obviously over the ball and tackle technique and being able to slow the rock. As much of a muchness, but Nick Timoney has been exceptional for Ulster over the last couple of seasons, scoring tries. I think it was the start of last season. He had 5 or 6 tries in the opening 5 or 6 games. Sort of went off a little bit. But yeah, there's no doubt in his pedigree. Sevens background. He just seems to have an engine on him. Like, his pace doesn't change from the first minute to the 80th minute. He just keeps going at that explosive, powerful, very dynamic pace, especially the same as Josh. Like, the boys come off after 80 minutes and they look like they could go for another 80 minutes. It's extraordinary.
Is it more important than ever as well, Stephen, in a World Cup year to experiment in the Six Nations? We kind of spoke with Alec Quinlan about this yesterday in terms of the number 10s, whether it's Carberry or whoever else, Crowley, getting the experience, and Ross Byrne as well. Do you need to have that, I guess, little bit of experimentation and make sure the players in actual games that mean something are used to stepping up to the plate?
Yeah, Shane, like I've been crying out for the last 3 or 4 seasons, even in the tour to New Zealand, about experimenting and bringing other people in. But the top international rugby is just all about results, and it's all about getting victories. And for Andy Farrell to put 5 or 6 lads in the opening game against Wales away from home in the Six Nations, and all of a sudden, they're obviously backed into a corner at the minute with the loss to Georgia. So they get a result, then all of a sudden it's Ireland. We know how fickle and how international sport can turn on its head within one game, never mind, a full Six Nations campaign. So I think Andy Farrell's got to be very cute and careful with his team selection throughout the Six Nations. Yes, there is opportunity to give guys a run, give them a chance. The likes of, Frawley, if he gets himself fit, put him behind a full-strength Irish pack in one or two of the games, see how he goes. If that's Crowley or if it's Carberry, then they can make those decisions. But I've said it for the last 2 years, like, I don't think that there's going to be somebody completely left field that's going to come in and start start for Ireland in the Rugby World Cup in the first or second game. It just feels like it's a very settled squad. It feels like there's only 2 or 3 lads that are going to get in ahead of somebody just because of an injury, not because they're playing really, really well. And like, I could maybe name off the team that I personally think is going to start if everybody's fighting fit in the Rugby World Cup. I'm sure your 2 teams would be very, very similar, and that's been the case for the last couple of seasons.
Is that a little bit concerning? Does it kind of smack a little bit of some preparation that we've had in previous World Cups?
Of course it is. Of course it's a concern. Johnny played against South Africa. Geez, we didn't play brilliantly, but we were up there. We met them with a physicality, far with fire, and Johnny seemed to lead the troops really well. And then their performance just dropped off against Fiji. I found myself chatting to people in the crowd for the majority of that match because it was a non-contest, and it was just this didn't get going. And then all of a sudden there was Johnny pulls out in the warm-up against Australia, and again it was a really disappointing game. I think people that paid their entrance fee maybe got their money's worth out of the last 5 or 6 minutes of the game, but apart from that, that was it. And that's just taking one player out, Ger. If you took 2 or 3 out, like we seen in the World Cup quarter-final 2015, taking a handful of the senior players out, they really underperformed. And that's always the concern. That's the worry. And you just look at the other teams. New Zealand seem to be picking up a bit of form again. South Africa, the squad depth that they have, their URC teams are playing very, very well. But we're just going to have to see how the season plays out. But we got to keep a consistency in our game, because going into previous World Cups, there was a drop-off for sure.
The Fiji and Australia games almost hinted at losing more than just the kicking when Johnny Sexton's not in the pitch. Like, and Brent Pope was really interesting on this after the match with ourselves on Saturday evening, where he's talking about, sometimes the second rowers and the back rows, they just want to get on with the game. Whereas Johnny has a leadership position. He's vocal. He's leading the team in terms of the next moves, and that seems to be quite lacking when he's not on the pitch.
It does. And Peter O'Mahony last minute had to be brought in as captain at the weekend, and that was probably his poorest game for Ireland in a long while. And maybe he's just at a stage in his career where he likes to focus and concentrate on his own personal responsibilities on the pitch. And Johnny's a very good way with the referees. Of course, we all know he does go over the line from time to time, but like Ben O'Keefe at the weekend, 38 penalties he gave in the game. 24 penalties he gave in the game. There was 38 lineouts in the game. Just stop, start. Just no flow whatsoever. And the other games that were being played, this New Zealand game, the French game, so much more flow. Is that just down to a captain? Is that down to the likes of Johnny being on the pitch? I think a little bit, yes. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that if Johnny Sexton isn't playing for Ireland, we're not going to play to the same level. And speaking to people, fans walking into the stadium, that's just what's been on everybody's lips for the last couple of weeks. But it's been on everybody's lips, realistically, lads, for the last 7 years. And unfortunately, we're still sitting in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy here with the coaching ticket as well, where Sexton's game continues to be at a very high level. So it's not like there's an obvious number two. So we'd like to see Joey Carberry get more game time, but he hasn't been fit when the opportunities have presented themselves, and so therefore you have to bear his injury profile in mind. We thought Frawley was going to get it, but it turns out 10 get injured a lot. Like Harry Byrne was the anointed successor 2.5 years ago, hasn't played really any meaningful rugby since. Ross Byrne is the only one who seems unbreakable, and for whatever reason, like he's like fourth or fifth on the depth chart, happy to show up and kick when he needs to. So I don't know. Maybe there is room for Ross Byrne being a hero for Ireland in a World Cup quarter final.
I think there is. Like, I think there's certainly a place for somebody who you can rely on to come on, kick a winning penalty, to come on, kick the corners. Like Ross Byrne, what 90% kicking accuracy in the URC for Leinster. He never lets them down. Yes, he's a little bit deeper than Johnny when he's trying to get the Leinster attack going or the Ireland attack going. I think he was a bit of a scapegoat as well for Ireland's big loss before the Rugby World Cup in 2019 when they lost 57 points to 15 in Twickenham. I was there that day. I was working the game, and nobody showed up for Ireland, but yet everybody was just talking about Ross Byrne wasn't able to get the Irish team going, and he's not up to international level, and blah blah blah, and all the rest of it. Well, I think he showed at the weekend that when the pressure's on and the referee shouting in his ear that you've only 20 seconds to go, and you're stepping up. I tell you what, that wasn't an easy kick, and it was a long kick as well. And he stroked it over, no problem, ran back to the halfway and got his team over the line in that game. So anybody who doubted his bottle or questioned his attitude or his credentials in the international rugby, I think he answered a lot of those critics with just knocking over that penalty. And who knows, Jerry, he could be the guy who could be sitting on the bench in a Rugby World Cup in the opening 2 or 3 games, because as you rightly say, he seems to be the only one that is playing consistent rugby, because the rest of them, like, it really is a concern when second, third, fourth choice out half are getting very little game time, and that's not just in a green jersey, that's in a red of Munster or a blue of Leinster.
Yeah, like Crowley's game time has been almost as much for Ireland this season as it has, because he's actually not first choice 10, or maybe they're going to move Carberry to 15 and pick Crowley at 10. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the provinces and how much influence or much pressure they might feel from the Ireland selectors to pick the Ireland players in their positions. So it's a very weird period over the next 5-6 months where everything feels a little bit fake, but actually at the same time the Six Nations is there to be won, and Johnny Sexton was talking about winning stuff, and we haven't won anything since, was it 18 or 19? So he doesn't want to be left out of the big games. He wants to play against France and England next year in particular. And I'm sure when your captain is saying, what are you doing not picking me? You have to pick me. It's hard to have those conversations.
It's hard to have those conversations. The other thing people don't understand, I was saying that again at the weekend, at the game, chatting to a few of the Aussie fans, why is Johnny starting? This is obviously 15-20 minutes before he actually didn't play because of injury. And I was like, hold on a second. Johnny's got, what, 4 games left at the Aviva? 3, 4? You've got France and England at home, maybe a couple of Rugby World Cup warm-up games, and that is it. He said to everybody he's going to retire after the Rugby World Cup. So, like, do you reckon he's just going to go, you know what, I'm grand, like, you play against England, you play against France, like that? He wants to keep writing his legacy into the history books of beating these big teams on the home patch and enjoying these final moments. We all know, Rory Best, I got the send off that he wanted. Geez, he had his kids on the pitch every week for about 3 years. But Johnny's going to want to be able to enjoy those special moments with his family in big wins at home in the last couple of games. And is there going to be that window of opportunity for Andy Farrell to tweak and bring in other guys? If you're Johnny Sexton, probably not.
A couple of Ulster backs putting their hands up as well for maybe a bit more inclusion, Stephen, in Robert Ballaccoon and Stuart McCluskey. And look, the depth chart there is fairly deep, so it's not easy, but both did quite well over the last 3 games.
Yeah, did quite well. Like Rob Ballaccoon, I watch him obviously week in, week out. Pace to burn, see very good under the high ball, not a bad kicking game. but he just doesn't seem as busy as like a Mac Hansen or a James Lowe. And people say, oh yeah, he just hangs out on his wing. I don't think he's obviously, he's tracking back and forth, chasing kicks up and down the pitch. I just think it comes with experience. It comes with being able to look for an opportunity around the breakdown, being able to, back yourself in certain situations. And yes, like wingers have to hold their width as well. You got to spread the defence. And if it's 1-on-1 and he's 10 or 15 yards to get in the try line, you would back him to get there. But I don't think he's Ireland's number one winger, number two winger. I think, James Lowe is definitely in there as well. You got to look at, obviously Andrew Conway's to come back in. Keith Earls, will he capture a bit of form? Like he showed 5 or 6 years ago, possibly. So there's plenty of depth in the back three, and I think the big talking point for me was Stuart McCluskey coming into the autumn internationals. Would he get a run? Would Andy Farrell have trust in him to put him in there and get a run? And I, like, leading into the first game, like maybe an hour before the team was announced, I was like, no, he's not going to pick him. And he'll not pick him on the bench either, because he's only played 12 really. And then all of a sudden he was in there, and I was like, do you know what? I think that sends a message to a lot of people in Ireland, a lot of the players in Ireland, a lot of the guys who are playing week to week brilliant rugby, because Stuart's been exceptional for Ulster over the last couple of seasons, and he thoroughly deserves a spot. Really disappointed, obviously, he didn't get more game time in the South African game first up, but he didn't really put a foot wrong. And Bundy come on and scored a decisive try against Australia, which I'm sure Stuart deep down wouldn't have really liked, to be honest. He would have been bollocks, but yeah, he's a quality operator, and I think he certainly has a spot in Andy Farrell's Rugby World Cup squad.
Yeah, and the thing is, if anybody gets injured, everybody's happy for him to go in. Like he's finally using his bulk and his heft in a meaningful way. One other player that I just wanted to get your impression on here before we go is Mike Lowry, who came in with such high hopes that he might be a bit of a joker, a bit of a game changer, somebody who could go in a number of positions in case of emergency, but it hasn't quite worked out for him over the November internationals.
No, it hasn't, and I'm not really sure why, because I thought he might have been injured or picked up a knock, or why did he not get a run against Fiji? It's a bit of a strange one. Jimmy O'Brien sort of come out of the woodwork, as he's obviously played very, very well, but I expected Mikey to get some game time, and when he played against, was it Italy, and scored a brace, and sent James Lowe over as well, very, very unselfishly, he could have scored a hat trick, and he ran in, he could have got the headlines. And I just think that, people always ask us, is he too small for international rugby? Is he just, you look at Cheslin Colby, Arensa for South Africa on the wings, they do have a bit more about them, a bit more size about them. They obviously both play in the wing as well. And Mikey Lowry, yes, he's been exceptional for Ulster since he made his debut, really, and brilliant for Ireland. But I'm just not sure. I just think there's other lads there that maybe are a bit more steady under the high ball, and maybe a little bit more reliable. But Mikey Lowry, I really did think he was going to get a shot. Unfortunately, is there going to be a chance in the Six Nations, Ger? Probably not.
Doesn't look like it. Just
briefly, Stephen, I know it's not a conversation really that leads itself to a brief one, but the Nick White issue that came up in the Australia game, unsteady on his feet, and I know it led to a bit of a back and forth on Virgin Media after the match between Matt Williams and Rob Kearney. Kearney saying you have to err on the side of caution when it comes to potential concussion, and Matt kind of saying you have to put the trust and the faith in the medical professionals. It's reared its ugly head again, this topic, and I know the HIA process is far from perfect, but I guess it is one of rugby's biggest questions and concerns at the moment.
Yeah, it sure is. I could probably sit on with you lads for another 20 minutes and talk about this. And Matt Williams is, he's a calculated guy. I work with Matt. He's very calculated. He knows what he's going to say. It's the last game of the autumn internationals. It's a perfect opportunity for him to get his name in lights, to start talking about science. He's talking out of his backside. Let's be honest with you. And you can go in and say, it's the doctor's fault. They've come out and said the independent doctor, he didn't see the second, where Nick White had his head off the ground. And I have a little bit of sympathy with that doctor because he mightn't. And when you get called for an HIA, he's maybe on his way into the change room, doesn't get to see the big screens. He's just getting into performing HIA. It's the Australian doctors that need to take responsibility. They're the ones that treated Nick White on the pitch. They're the ones that seen him stumble in front of him. They're the ones that looked into his eyes and seen his eyes glazed over. And, that independent doctor seems to be the one that's in the firing line at the minute. Why? The questions need to be answered by the Australian doctors, the Australian medical staff, because it was unacceptable. He should not have been brought back onto the pitch. And Matt Williams, put your trust and faith in science. How about you put your trust and faith in your own personal judgment and your own experience? And that's what the Australian medical staff didn't do. And you can put 100 people in with a concussion and do the HIA test or whatever it is, and I bet you not every single 100 people out of that test will pass it. So for me, it was there needs to be more lessons learned. Jesus, lads, how many times are we going to bloody talk about this? I'm sick of family, friends, close, anybody close to me going, oh, geez, what if it's going on at this level, what's happening in mini rugby? What's happening when I send my young kid up to Belfast Harlequins or Dungannon or Gary Owen, wherever it may be, to go play mini rugby if they're taking banks in the head and they're looking at lads on the TV being brought back on when obviously they are concussed. And what do we have now, lads? Nick White's been stood down.
Yeah.
So it's something. I know there's been a lot of chat about it, and probably everybody's regurgitating the same information, but there has to be a stance on this because it's just not good enough. And just to reference again, Matt Williams, talking about put our faith in science, you've got that all wrong.
Stephen, always great to have you with us. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, lads.